From Community Public Radio, this is the CPR News. From New York, I'm Don DeBar. Today we go to Moscow to speak with analyst Mark Sloboda, and we're going to talk, I guess, about the gas, oil, petroleum, whatever, the crisis as we go into winter in Europe, and we see gas prices pretty much double since January, where I am anyway, in New York, about all of the things that are happening around that from a geopolitical perspective and from the finance perspective also. Mark, fill us in on what's been happening.
Hi, Don. Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be with you on CPR.
And also the same having you.
So it hasn't quite penetrated U.S. headlines and nightly news as probably as much as it should. But certainly Americans have all noticed inflation setting in. Increasing prices for gasoline, for pretty much everything. Right, across the board, because everything is supplied by logistics. Everything runs on oil, whether it's production, delivery, so on, shipping things across the ocean, truck traffic in the U.S. Everything depends on energy at one point. As a result of economies, the world's major economies starting to come out of the economic crisis and recession hit by the pandemic, we are now facing an energy crisis where suddenly, as the amount of energy produced was tapered down because of lower demand, now demand is soaring high rather quickly, and supply is racing to catch up with that demand, leading to higher prices for everything in terms of energy.
Right.
Oil, is not the only thing. Gas, coal, everything right now. The prices around the world are quite high, and that is having inflationary effects around the world.
Oh, sure.
And inflationary effects in the U.S. means consumers pay more for gas at the pump and other things. But in Africa, and other parts of the third world, inflation prices like that means that many more people starve to death.
Yeah.
The effect is much greater. Europe is in the midst of its own energy crisis, and it is kind of in a perfect storm. And while a part of this is certainly oil, there is right now the big issue is natural gas. Europe is increasingly reliant on natural gas, and part of the reason for this is they are starting to as much as they can, as a good thing, shift away from dirtier fuels, particularly coal, right? For environmental climate-related reasons, because natural gas, while still a fossil fuel, has considerably lower carbon footprint than coal.
Right.
This has led to, increased demand for natural gas. Natural gas is used both to heat homes, and it's also used to as a kind of a stopback on a lot of electricity supplies.
That's right.
It takes up the slack on other things like renewables, nuclear power, and other things. And even the process of refining gasoline or refined petroleum from oil requires natural gas, right? It's this kind of energy nexus with oil, gas, water that all combines together, and they're all actually necessary for each other. Europe is needing increased amounts of natural gas every year. And this has, in recent years, Germany in particular has had a greater need for natural gas because after the events of Fukushima in Japan, there was an outcry against nuclear power, and Angela Merkel responded to that by shutting down, phasing out Germany's nuclear power plants,
Right.
Which is got to be picking up somewhere, and it's being picked up by natural gas. And this is one of the reasons why Germany and German business in particular was very, very keen on this second Nordstream pipeline going underneath the Baltics, piped directly to Germany, right? And they did not want – they've seen in the past that when – Ukraine, or even before the events of the Maidan in 2014, even before that, when Ukraine was unable to pay its own energy bills, it was often cutting off the flow to Europe of gas piped through its country as a transit country through its pipelines, or to siphon off gas intended for Europe for their own use and for their own energy security. Right? They wanted to bypass Ukraine. It was a energy security political problem for them, as much as it was for Russia and everyone else. And then there was, of course, the transit fees that had to be paid to Ukraine and to Poland for transiting gas across their territories, which increased prices. If you don't have to pay transit fees, the cost of the natural gas, of course, at both ends, right? The from the supplier and from the consumer goes down. And this energy, particularly when we're talking pipeline energy is geopolitics because it is security. Without energy, societies don't run.
Right.
And without energy in the winter, the lights don't go on, the houses don't heat. It's absolutely necessary.
Yep.
So it is, of course, a big geopolitical issue. And the U.S. has tried hard to kill Nord Stream 2 because they did not want a closer energy security relationship between Russia and Germany as the largest country in Europe. And Germany actually would act as an energy hub, then not only receiving gas for their own purposes, but also then, transiting it to other European countries as well. Yeah. At the same time, though, the U.S. has increased its import of oil from Russia to the United States. Russia is now the second biggest source of oil imports to the U.S. after Canada. It used to be Mexico in the number 2 slot.
Wow.
But because of U.S. sanctions on Venezuela and Iran, U.S. has had to, find other sources of imported oil. And Russia, despite the hypocrisy of the U.S. telling Germany, another country, you can't have this pipeline. We're dictating your energy, your foreign policy, your energy security to you, and they tried to kill it against their own allies' companies involved. And there was state European energy companies from across Europe involved in this pipeline project, not just Germany, Austria, France, the UK. All these big state energy companies had a share in this because they would all benefit from it, from increased reliable supply.
Right.
So the U.S. was threatening to sanction its own allies at the same time as it was buying more Russian oil itself very quietly and trying not to make a big deal out of that.
Right.
So
it's doing the very thing that they It's doing the very thing they would sanction other people for. Right.
But so this. Not only is there an issue of rapidly increasing demand both over time as the EU moves away from more dirty fossil fuels and nuclear power, but also in the short term because of recovering economies around the world all needing more energy quickly, right? That is pushing energy prices up around the world. There's global competition now, right? China needs gas and oil. Europe needs gas and oil. Everyone wants gas and oil, and prices are rising. But there's another of other factors. One of them is the over-reliance on alternative energies in Europe. Now, Europe doing their best to put renewable energies into their energy grid is good. right?
Sure.
But over-reliance on it is not good.
Right.
They had a bad wind year. Right? The wind didn't blow.
Right.
And as a result, they had to use much more natural gas from their storages throughout the year to supply electricity that they weren't betting on. And that's what happened when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
It blows.
Is that you need fallback measures like natural gas.
Right.
On top of that, there was a long winter last year.
Right.
And they were drawing more on their storage than ever before. So they started out this year with very low amounts of natural gas left in their storage tanks.
Right.
Then we had the biggest supplier of natural gas to Europe is Russia, and that's close to 50% of the EU's natural gas it gets from Europe. Some countries more than others, particularly countries in Eastern Europe some of them are almost totally 100% reliant on Russia. But Norway is number 2 on that list with some 30%. Then Algeria, and then some smaller players like Qatar in that mix. But Russia is the biggest player, and the EU has had decreasing domestic supplies of natural gas. The Netherlands, which was previously a big producer, their fields are running dry, so they're producing less natural gas than ever before.
Right.
Norway was pumping a little bit less because of maintenance issues, and the EU all throughout the summer, as natural gas prices were increasing, decided not to buy because of rising prices, and left their storage tank filling before the winter too late. They didn't fill their storage tanks. All of this has led to a perfect storm. Right. That has led to natural gas price increases in Europe that have never been seen before. Sometimes some 600% year on year from last year, and they've been paying regularly now in excess of $1,000 per 1,000 cubic meters, which is a huge increase on what it was previously. And this is causing a huge inflationary effect on everything, right? The price of electricity goes up.
Right.
The price of heating homes, the price of food, everything is going up even faster as a result of
fertilizers, transportation of all goods. Yep.
And this comes right on the same time as that a number of European countries and the U.S. tried very hard to kill the Nordstream 2 pipeline to bring more Russian natural gas into Europe by a reliable route, this Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And they have delayed, of course, the completion of it. Now it's been physically completed despite the U.S.'s best efforts by Russia, by the Russian companies involved in the construction of it. But it still has gas is actually in the pipeline now, so it's ready to go. But there's still questions of qualifications, inspections, and legal issues that they're still facing delay on.
Right.
And so, if Europe rapidly approve this would do a lot to help satisfy their demand. Now, prices are only going to go up because Europe's storage tanks on average right now are only 70-some% full, when usually they're like 90% full going into the winter season. So it's going to be really tough economically for them. And there's been a lot of blaming for Russia on this. Now, the EU has been pushing Russia as an attempt to diversify supply and to decrease Russian geopolitical leverage over countries that are locked in an import-export relationship on gas with it. They've been trying to push European countries to move away from long-term gas contracts with Russia towards operating on a spot market. right? Where the prices go up and down according to the market, and you buy, as your needs buy prices according to the market. Now, those European countries that have long-term gas contracts with Russia, like Germany, they're not being affected much by this energy crisis, not directly anyway, because their prices are set, they're fixed, it is stable. And while in some years, Europe, these countries operating on the spot market now, these European EU countries, have benefited from low prices, there's a bull and a bear. And now they're seeing the opposite side, and they're facing gas prices 600% what they were a year ago. And so, trying to blame Russia for this is, this meme of a young boy riding a bike, and he's riding along, and he reaches down and he pushes a stick between the spokes of the wheels as he's going, which causes the bike, of course, to seize up, throwing him on the ground. And then he holds his knees in pain and yells and blames someone else, usually Russia. Russia. Damn you, Russia. Right. This is an entirely you want, and Putin has been like, look, you wanted the spot market, you wanted to play the market, now you see the bad side of that, and it has to be said that, of course, Russia is benefiting in the short term for this. They don't want prices to go up too high for too long, because then countries will start investing in other supplies of energy and other ways to reduce energy, which would decrease demand long term.
You know what's cute? There's something cute about this too. You have the question of security being raised. NATO also, at the NATO meeting, they were big concern about Russia and the collective security. New stuff. In fact, they revised a whole lot of their policies towards Russia.
Their grand strategy for defense and deterrence of the Euro-Atlantic region.
There's a what do you call it? From Germany, Jürgen Tritten was at a news conference the other day and laid out what the coalition that's governing now in Germany, what requirements they had for a Nordstream 2 gas pipeline, and you're talking about security. Here they say under EU rules, they have to unbundle the ownership of the pipeline from the ownership of the gas supplier. In other words, right now, Russia owns the pipeline, and Gazprom owns the pipeline. I assume Gazprom and owns the gas that's being sold, and so they have a reliable distribution network that nobody can play games with. And what Germany is basically demanding is that they spin off ownership of the pipeline, meaning some Western people will have their hands in it, thereby compromising the ability to deliver it reliably.
They're trying to dictate the internal structure of Russian energy, basically, of their own pipelines and so on. It's pretty crazy, and all these political games on energy are of course now backfiring, and again. There's a lot of attempt that this whole thing is created by Russia. No, this whole situation is a combination of kind of a perfect storm of events and the EU's own actions here.
Right, the storm of events that are consequent to policy choices that were made already.
Now, even the Russian president, the president of the company Gazprom have all said, we're fulfilling all of our contracts, all of our long-term contracts that we have are being met completely. And Angela Merkel and the European Commission have said exactly that, right? Russia is in full compliance with its energy contracts, and year on year, it's actually has been pumping so far this year about 8% or slightly higher than the year before. So it's giving more gas to Europe than it did last year pumping.
Right.
But these storage tanks are so low. And recently there's the issue, Russia also has to fill its own storage tanks for the winter. Russia is a cold country, and it uses a lot of energy to heat people's homes during the winter, most of that coming from natural gas.
Right.
And they're like, we'll be glad to sell, what we have left on the spot market. But let's be clear, we have to fill our own storage tanks now first. Plus, China is on the other side. They need more coal. They need more electricity. They need more natural gas. They need more oil. And, we're sitting in the driver's seat right now in face of demand. When just a year ago, you were trying to say, we don't want any more Russian gas. Now suddenly you want Russian gas. Right. Well, you can't have it both ways.
Right. You can't not have your cake nor eat it too.
Yeah, too. So, it's become a tough economic and political situation. And Russia, is supplying gas. They're perfectly clear. If this Nordstream 2 we'll be able to provide you even more gas, to help solve this crisis in the short term. But if you don't approve it, we can't do anything about that. Right. We're limited here. And no, Russia does not want to pump more gas than necessary through existing pipelines through Ukraine. Right. It has to, by contract, for a few more years, pump a certain amount of gas through. The way these pipelines are, you constantly have to have some amount of gas going through them. Right. You can't ever really stop completely. And it has contracts with some countries. It has transit contracts with Ukraine that will all expire in the next year or two. But right now it's meeting all its contractual obligations. It doesn't want to pump more gas through because then it has to pay transit fees to Ukraine, and Ukraine has been trying to kill the very hard the other pipeline that they were establishing, a blackmail leverage over Russia. Russia is not obligated to finance a U.S.-backed putsch regime in Kiev. Correct. With gas transit fees, right? Yeah. There's absolutely no obligation. It's actually kind of silly for to think that Russia should have to do that. Now, stepping into this is little Moldova, which is right now back and forth with Ukraine for the poorest country in Europe on a per capita basis. They just elected for the first time a real pro-Western government that is trying to geopolitically reorientate their country. But unfortunately, their gas contract, long-term gas contract with Gazprom just ended. Oops. And they are $700 million in debt to Gazprom already, and when they were paying a tiny fraction of the price of the current market price for gas. Now,
how much did you say? Has offered. Did you say $700 million?
$700 million. Yeah, 400 and some million in direct fees, and then another 300 million in late fees and other problems that have built up over the years.
The population of Moldova. The population of Moldova is like 2.5 million. That's a lot of debt.
They're having problems there, and the biggest source of electricity to Moldova is actually in Transnistria, the breakaway province, which is supported by Russia, has been the Russian peacekeepers there since 1992, since the breakup of the Soviet Union. There was a nasty little war fought there, but Gazprom has offered Moldova a 25% discount on the current market rate if they recognize and start paying off their debt as well. Gazprom is like, we're a business, right? We can't just give you free gas because you need it. And that's not good enough for Moldova. They want a 50% discount, and they refuse to they refuse to pay off their debt. On back when they were paying cheap prices. So you now see headlines like in the BBC right now about that Russia is stopping the flow of gas to the poorest country in Europe. Yeah. Because they don't have a contract and they're not paying their bills and they're steeply in debt. And, we don't just give you free gas because you need it all of a sudden. And you guys wanted the market in the EU. Now you've got a market for gas and a spot market, and it's pushing up prices to the level that they are now. If you had long-term gas contracts, if Moldova had settled this issue earlier, saying, hey, our contract's going to expire, in 8 months, let's sit down and hash out a new one now. Right. They didn't want to. And, now, there's this question. So to demonstrate their independence, they just imported a small amount of gas from Poland, saying this demonstrates our independence from Russia, that we don't rely on Russia, except, of course, that Poland gets 80% of its gas from Russia.
Other than that,
they just paid another markup on the gas because of a middleman, just like Ukraine has done for years now. We don't buy Russian gas. We buy our gas from Slovakia.
Right. Who buys it from Russia?
Which buys their gas from Russia.
or we tap the pipeline.
Which makes their own citizens pay more.
Right, of course. Taxes, you got a couple more brokers in the food chain.
Between, right? Everyone's going to take a cut of that. Of course. But, for saying that we're not buying Russian gas, we're independent from Russia. If you want to be independent from Russia, that's fine. You don't have to buy Russian energy. Right. Just, I don't know where you're going to get it from. So, there's a lot of really crazy headlines going on, and like I said, there's no small amount of schadenfreude in Russia right now over this whole thing. A little bit of smugness, but at the same time, they do have to maintain a reputation as a reliable supplier of energy, and they can't be too overweening with this smugness, because the Europeans are domestically looking for anyone to blame but themselves, of course, because they all got to face elections. So it's still easier to blame Russia for, what is largely a crisis that is at least half of their own making.
Well, and the thing is, they got to do that gingerly because, as best they can approximate that, because while Russia is willing now to give, whatever they'll buy, basically, it is, if they keep accusing Russia of using it as a geostrategic weapon, guess what? They really lose nothing by actually doing it at some point. And they're not really in a good position to let that happen with sitting going into the winter with no oil and gas.
Yeah. There's a lot of real hypocrisy. How dare Russia weaponize energy? Well, first of all, Russia isn't weaponizing energy half as much as they could, or perhaps should.
The U.S. weaponizes food, okay? Well, what are you talking about?
The U.S. and the EU, they all weaponize their own economies.
Right. The whole global economy.
Everything else. Yeah. Right? Why shouldn't Russia, respond in kind with energy? Absolutely. Of course, the only reason they don't is because it's in their own benefits not to, right? Because the supplier is as dependent on this relationship as is the consumer, because Russia depends on the inflows of capital to their economy from payments. Yeah. So it locks the two countries together.
One of the problems here is that so many decisions that are made here, policy decisions, are transaction driven rather than long-term goal policy driven. So where it's also against the interests of the United States to sanction everybody in the world to the point where they get to no one will trade. They won't trade with anyone because everyone's bad, and they have no trading partners as a consequence. I mean, they keep inching their way towards this. And
they're inching their way towards countries breaking out of the dollar.
The whole global system. They're undermining it.
Eventually, they keep pushing it. It's going to collapse.
They're forcing it. Like they forced a strategic partnership, whatever it really means, an announced one, and conduct, some forms of it between Russia and China by being so aggressive against both of them at the same time. We got to stop here because we're out of time. But this has been an interesting conversation, and I'd like to continue it next week if you can.
Sure.
All right. Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. We'll speak with you again next week.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all the news we have for you right now. For Community Public Radio, I'm Don DeBar in New York. Thanks for listening.